couple of words in Portuguese since we're hosting this from the University of Coimbra in Portugal. And I hope you don't mind, Inger. And then I will switch to English to the rest of the time. Bem-vindos a todos. Este é um ciclo de seminário de conferências que vai incluir palestras ou conversas chamado Ciência e Sociedade para a Sustentabilidade. Está integrado, associado a uma disciplina da Universidade de Coimbra, que é a Literacia para o Ambiente e Sustentabilidade, até agora chamada Ecoliteracy, que está muito associada à Cátedra Unesco para a Biodiversidade e a Conservação para o Desenvolvimento Sustentável, cuja coordenadora se encontra aqui connosco para falar hoje, a professora Helena Freitas. Isto é uma disciplina que pretende tocar em vários assuntos relacionados com a sustentabilidade e, em particular, endereçar alguns dos Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável da Agenda 2030 das Nações Unidas. E, neste contexto, estamos a promover alguns webinars, neste caso, seria seminários noutro contexto, que estão também abertos ao público e esperamos que tenham grande adesão para podermos também conversar sobre estes temas, não só com os alunos e com os docentes, mas também com quem esteja interessado da sociedade em geral. So I'm going to switch to English now. Welcome everyone to our conference cycle or seminar series, Science and Society for Sustainability. This is a series we're starting now, promoted by the UNESCO Chair on Biodiversity Safeguard for Sustainable Development, whose chairholder is present with us today, is one of our speakers, Professora Helena Freitas. And this is associated also with a master's degree discipline, the Literacy for Sustainability and the Environment, or Ecoliteracy, as is known still officially at the University of Coimbra. It's a course that aims to discuss and promote the ideas and literacy about sustainability, and in particular about different topics related with the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. And today, we have the students of this discipline with us, and also two very illustrated guests. Our chairholder, Professor Helena Freitas from the University of Coimbra, and our dear guest, also Professor Inger Måren from the University of Bergen in Norway. I will start by introducing our guest speaker from abroad, just because Helena and I are here in Coimbra, and then introduce Professor Helena Freitas as well, and then we will move on to our conversation. So Inger Måren is a professor at the University of Bergen, as I was saying, in Norway. She is also the chair of the holder of a UNESCO chair, in this case on sustainable heritage and environmental management. And her research has a strong background on plant ecology, just like Professor Helena Freitas and also myself. So we're three plant ecologists here, three women scientists, three plant ecologists. Professor Inger, she focuses on the dynamics of coupled human and natural systems, what's called the socio-ecological system, and includes several themes from sustainable resource management, sustainable land use, ecosystem services, agroecology, as well as sustainable food systems. She works across both the social and the natural sciences, and with a lot of colleagues from Europe, Asia, North America, and Africa. She focuses especially on the sustainable development related with the Sustainable Development Goal 15, which is land on life, or life on land, I'm sorry, and where sustainable land use is a central theme. She is a member of the Sustainability Collegium at the University of Bergen, and also at the Norwegian UNESCO Commission. And she was part of the draft that proposed the very first biosphere reserve in Norway, the Nordhordland UNESCO Biosphere. And so her research is also very much related with the worldwide network of biosphere reserves. And Inger is a partner in a project that Professor Helena Freitas coordinates, and which I'm part of also, which is exactly related with our national network of biosphere reserves that I hope we will talk a little bit afterwards. Welcome, Inger. And I will now introduce Professor Helena Freitas, which is...
You can skip it. You can skip it.
I will introduce. So I know for our national context, you probably already very well known, but Professor Helena Freitas is a professor here at the University of Coimbra, full professor. She has done her PhD in Coimbra in collaboration with Bielefeld in Germany, and then did some postdoc studies in United States at Stanford, and then since then has been pretty much dedicated to the University of Coimbra here, but and doing research also starting in the plant ecology and mycophysiology field, but then also expanding to the things of sustainability, of ecosystem services, a wide array. Besides her work in research and as a scientist, she has also had some incursion in politics. So she has been a deputy member at the Assembly of the Republic or Assembly of Republic. She has also led the mission of Interior to try to improve the value of the interior regions of Portugal. She has also been vice dean of the University of Coimbra. In her more environmental application side, she's been the president of the League of Nature, Liga para a Natureza Portuguesa, also the founder and president of the Portuguese Society of Ecology, and also vice president of the European Society of Ecology. And right now, she continues her professorship here at Coimbra, being also the director of the Center for Functional Ecology and holder coordinator of the UNESCO Chair for Biodiversity and Safeguard of Sustainable Development. And I think I could go on, but most people would like to hear you, both of you. Welcome, Helena, welcome, Inger, and to start speaking. So I don't know who would like to start.
You should.
Inger, if you want to say a few words. And
You're
then,
very polite in Portugal, at the very least.
Yeah,
so
we should always invite the external guests. So Inger, you can say a few words about yourself if you'd like, and then I would like to ask you about the title of our webinar today. Welcome to Anthropocene. What would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, so that's quite a big subject. I think I'm not going to say anything more about myself because thank you very much for a very thorough presentation. I think focusing on being cross-disciplinary is good to have in the back of your minds, with one foot in ecology and natural sciences, and then a little foot in social sciences. Is where I'm at right now. The talk here today, and I hope that the students will join us with some questions and maybe some comments along the way. So please, if you feel you have some comments, I think just unmute maybe, or use the chat. I don't know what you prefer, Catarina.
I think the students can raise their hands and then I can tell them to unmute.
Yeah.
I think for the students, we will have some public on YouTube, and that will be just how do you say, by chat. But here the students, I think, would be nice if they can participate directly. But it's up to them. If they're too shy, chat is fine as well.
Yes, it's good to get some feedback from you and also see your perspectives on things. So firstly, the question is, why have we called it Welcome to the Anthropocene? And I wonder, you could just raise your hand. Is there anybody of you students that have not heard this term before? Everybody is familiar with the term. Good. Sometimes some people have, I teach 2 different sustainability courses, and of course this is a central theme to both of them. And sometimes some students have not heard this term before. I have some slides, and I wonder if I should share my screen, and just a couple of slides so you can see. Can you see my screen? Yes, okay. So this is a very funny sign, I think. showing do you see both screens or do you see just one screen? One screen, okay.
We see one screen and then you as a miniature.
Okay, great. Yes, so this is a very funny presentation of the Anthropocene. And I think we should reflect a little bit about what the Anthropocene really means. And the word itself, it's from ancient Greek, where anthropos means human, and scene from kainos, new or recent. So this term now seeks to embody the human impacts on the environment. And it tries to do so by actually becoming a geological timescale period. And there's still debates going on about this term. And as you can see, this paper, one-side paper, which is a very compact paper by Paul Crutzen, is actually the paper that gave the birth to the usage, the wide usage of this term. So it's a very short paper that you can read through quickly to see kind of the source of this term, which has of course swelled and gone into many different both academic institutions and environments and fields, but also non-academic and arts, for instance. So it's now a quite widely used term that is used in many different ways. And of course, we have modified landscapes. I work in Nepal quite a bit. And here is a picture from one of my field sites in Nepal. And you can see that the whole landscape here has been modified quite severely. Of course, this should have been covered with forests if it hadn't been disturbed and reshaped by people. And then also, just to illustrate very clearly that we use natural capital, and that changes the surface of the earth to such an extent now that we feel the need for this new epoch in our timeline that is following the Holocene time period. And we talk about all these different aspects of the Anthropocene, the extinction crisis, habitat loss, fragmentation, overexploitation, invading species, global climate change, overuse of fresh water. That's not a huge issue in Bergen, I can assure you, but elsewhere, that's of course a very big issue. And then of course, carbon emissions, and especially human-induced carbon emissions. So that's kind of the background, and I'm sure that you're all also familiar with the planetary boundaries framework from Johan Rockström at the Stockholm Resilience Center. And of course, this ties very nicely together with the term, the Anthropocene. And just to show you some of these curves that I'm sure you've seen many of, where things kind of escalate towards our end of the time scale. We use more stuff and we produce more stuff, and we emit more stuff of all these different factors. And maybe these curves you have not seen so many of. You see it's depicting flow of information, flow of goods, flow of capital, and flow of people. And this comes from the Future is Now report that came out in 2019, which is really a very good report, co-edited by Peter Messerly. And I advise you to take a look at this report. It's very good to see this science, the place for science in sustainability work. So I think I'll just leave this as the last slide when it comes to talking about the Anthropocene, because people are still debating on when we should put the mark. When did the Anthropocene start? So should it start when we started using fire and opening up the landscape and getting rid of all the megafauna that was in all these different continents? Or is it when we started farming, or when we started large-scale mining, or when the Europeans went to America, or by the Industrial Revolution? A lot of people think that we should set the timing for when the first atomic bomb was tested, because this leaves a mark that can be seen geologically around the whole globe. So, and then we have the time called the Great Acceleration, right after the Second World War, when a lot of things exploded, especially our consumption of goods, and also, of course, the populations, many places as well. So there are different arguments for placing the Anthropocene at these different marks. You can see this is from a paper by Molly. And but of course, these scientists are sitting on this board need to make a decision of where it should start. And then, of course, we also can discuss, has the Anthropocene even started? Many people argue that no, because we need to transgress these planetary boundaries before we can say something. We can say that we're truly in the Anthropocene. So some people argue that we are not even there yet. So as you can see, there is many different arguments around the terminology even. That's good to be aware of if you find this interesting and you want to dive into literature dealing with the Anthropocene. So I think I'll stop sharing here. And that was just a few slides to kind of put it a little bit in perspective from a little bit more historical lens.
Thank you, Inger. That was very nice and a very good comprehensive introduction. Helena, would you like to say some words, and would you want to complement this, some knowledge also about the Anthropocene for the students and the public?
Well, thank you very much. We didn't really organize between ourselves, but the challenge was somehow to bring up the issue of the Anthropocene and having our different and complementary, let's say, vision of what's going on. And it's funny because I think that somehow we've managed to have a complementary proposals. So I will share also a few slides so that we have first a brief introduction to the topic, and then I think I presume we will have some discussion. So I will share a few slides, and of course I think we have one or two, of course, planetary boundaries, but I will try to share. I will share my. Okay. Briefly. So Inga did a wonderful introduction to the topic and historical introduction to the topic, and I think she said most of it. In any case, just a few more data, especially in terms of what is nature in this overall picture, and just to give you a few more figures I think are relevant, and one of them is this Global Living Planet Index, which I think is clear. You can see that over the past 50 years, we had a drop of almost 70% of population sizes of mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles, which is really huge. This is a very strong, the last 50 years are really extremely relevant in terms of characterizing the Anthropocene and the overall picture of nature and over the last 5-6 decades. And the same kind of data you can see. We can use world population, world fertilizers, global water use, and there's what has been extract somehow from nature. But I will use the food systems mostly because I think the food system is a very pertinent fingerprint of the Anthropocene over the last especially after the Second World War, and we can see the kind of the major crops that we've been consuming and producing, and the large 40-50% of the land has been changed to land to farming systems. We keep producing a number of crops, and essentially we don't have much diversity in the food system. And we've been changing the planet in order to respond to a crazy food system that we managed to build, and it's really taking a lot from nature, a lot of land use, a lot of biomass, and it's very impressive. And I've decided to bring the food system because also Catarina asked me to bring you some context about the Green Deal, the European Green Deal, and that's one of the reasons why I've decided to bring this the food system. And it's where you can see, for example, the impact of fertilizers, pesticides, the impact of the synthetic nitrogen is huge, and we will speak a lot about this issue over the decade, I'm sure. And of course, insects. It's another system and another group where we can see a huge impact of all the changes we've managed to implement, or to the change we made in the planet, and the insect decline is very impressive, and and we don't really know the effect of this impact in terms of the pollination, the ecosystem service pollination, and what will be the impact again in the food system, but not only in the food system, but it's very serious what is happening with insects in the planet. Overall, the changes are amazing, and this is a very recent paper on Frontiers of Conservation Science, and you can see that most of the biomes, most of the ecosystems are extremely affected, degraded, and so you can say that most of the ecosystem services that they should provide are certainly affected, from oceans to kelp forests, seagrass meadows, coral reefs, and so on. So wetlands, it's amazing. In some of them, you have like 70 to 80% of the ecosystems seriously damaged, and so this means that's one of the reasons why we say that now is time for restoration, is time for nature, because well the impact is huge. And of course, it's also worth to emphasize what is happening with climate change, and of course the increase of 50% over the 20s. I'm sorry. Not only CO2. CO2 is typically the one of the effects that we tend to emphasize. But then if we take into consideration methane, which accounts for 1 unit of methane, is represents in terms of global warming 30 times more than CO2, than the same unit of CO2. You can imagine what can be the impact of methane, and especially if we considering the scenarios of change in the North Pole after if we have the melting of the glaciers. And the same goes for nitrogen. Nitrogen is really something that we don't really know. It's one of the areas that is going to need a lot of work in terms of assessment and recover. And of course, Inga already said the planetary boundaries, and One of the graphs that I think that is really impressive and that really it's impossible to remain really. It's to me is imagine the impact of the human activity in general in the planet biomass, and you can see that what is left for wild animals is this very tiny points, this very tiny part of the system. The whole system is entirely used for humans, or either human biomass or pets and livestock that is used for humans, and this is very impressive. And if you go for the global biomass across mammals and birds, you can see the same picture where you have the biomass, the global biomass of wild animals as mammals, as I said before, is 40% if you compare to humans or farm animals, and even birds. Not even 30% is left for wild birds, and most of the birds are already, the biomass is huge for farm chickens, farm ducks. So essentially we are transforming the planet to serve human interests and human goals, and we tend to forget nature. But we are part of nature, and we rely on nature to provide us with food, water, shelter. And this is a very nice statement of the economics of biodiversity, one of the latest Dasgupta review that you probably know. If you don't know, you should know. You should read. It's a very important book and assessment, global assessment. It's very, very interesting for anyone that really wants to know more about nature, the state of nature. It's a global assessment of nature, essentially. And it's very interesting, even though it's at the basis is very, very much from the economic side, but it's interesting to know and to follow. Well, we use nature also as a sink for waste, such as carbon dioxide, plastics, and other forms of waste, including pollution. But as our Portuguese Secretary General for the United Nations said, António Guterres, we hope that 2021 must be the year to reconcile humanity with nature, and we very much hope so. And that we have a kind of a reset after this pandemic, and we will understand the role of nature, the relevance of nature, even for our intrinsically human condition, let's say. So we have this reconciliation has to be really possible this year. And we have a very interesting and important momentum in October, where we have the big meeting in China on the Convention for Biological Diversity, and we are all hoping that we'll come up with a final agreement very much in similar to the one that we managed with the Paris Agreement for climate change. Because up to now, in terms of nature, and these figures actually are changing, but this is quite recent, and we have around 60% of the land and more or less half of it, of the ocean, in areas that we designate for protection of nature. So in somehow they have a kind of a status of protection, but we hope to have it increased to 30%. And over this in October, in the next meeting and in this final agreement, we hope to have a compromise and 30% of the planet by 2030, including both land and water protection. And I'm not going, this is the future, I hope. And the future is we manage to keep some part of the planet set aside for nature. And we will also manage to recover and to restore the parts of the planet that we have somehow destroyed or degraded very much. And these are the so-called nature-based solutions. And I very much hope that this narrative really, but the right narrative, not the greenwashing narrative, but the right narrative really comes and will become part of the socio-economical system in terms of change and in terms of future. I do hope so. This is just very much like a final remark, because we have, this is time for regeneration and to build the future. and we have to ensure that we put more back into natural and social systems than we take out. We have to recognize the interconnectedness of all natural systems, as well our interdependence of planetary health with human health and well-being. We have to shift our value, how the value is created, as well as what is valued, so that equity is very important for nature and for our survival. It's built into the system with ensuring the dignity and well-being of all as the goal. And we have to actively build capacity to ensure that ecological and human systems have capacity to adapt, evolve, and thrive in the context of change. I don't want to see these kind of cartoons as part of a truly life. Well, I think I will stop sharing, and I was just planning to bring up our project, but maybe
I will ask you at the end.
Afterwards. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, it's fine. Thank you very much, Helena. You went through, it was a very nice overview as well of the Anthropocene. And I will ask you in a few minutes to go back to some of those slides, if you don't mind, because I wanted to have a chance that we spoke a little bit more about, so where we are right now, our planet, our people, this unity that you mentioned, that we're not separate from nature, where one is one health, right? Our health depends on the planet's and nature's health. And so I would like to speak a little bit more about where we are, how we came here, how we reached this status, let's see, and how it evolved the Anthropocene, and then move on a little bit to the future and what can we do about it. And then I will ask you again, if you don't mind, to briefly mention some of the last slides you have, and you will have also the opportunity to speak about the project, which is so important, and the link between the two. So Inger, would you, I think, so your background and current research is very strongly linked to these socio-ecological systems, which goes back to what Helena mentioned of this connectivity and what our United Nations Secretary General's Portuguese, António Guterres, mentioned about this time to bring together, to reconcile nature and the planet. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this and how to approach what you do a bit in your research, but how to approach this as a unity, as the human and nature, socio-ecological. Thank you very much.
Yes, sure. Of course, to say that we try to work holistically and include both nature and natural processes, and then also society and people and societal processes, it gets quite complicated, of course, and complex. So we have this term, social ecological systems, that tries to combine that, because like Helena said, it's impossible to see our future without being more in harmony with nature, because we are part of nature. And for way too long, we have been living under this illusion that we are something separate and we can negotiate, right? But you don't negotiate with nature. Nature is non-negotiable. we are biological creatures, and we have to take responsibility. So looking at different issues with a social ecological lens means that you try to link the human activities to the natural processes, so you actually get a more holistic and more realistic picture of what's going on. And that's what we are doing, for instance, when we use UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere program and its associated biosphere reserves. And we go in and study those areas, for instance, because those are areas where people live and work, but there are also places where there is nature of great value. So we can study different dynamics within these systems. And of course now most of the world is inhabited by people, and and our livestock, obviously, when we saw those illustrations that Helena showed, right? So it's not just us, it's also all our livestock and our activities that create a lot of pressure on natural systems. So, and resilience, of course, is a term that stems from ecology originally, but it means that it means the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize. And in a social ecological context, that means that we have the ability to use a disturbance, like for instance, COVID-19, to reorganize and maybe fare better on the other side if we act wisely. So in a social ecological setting, it's more about utilizing and seeing change or a disaster, a catastrophe, or a disturbance like COVID-19 as a kind of a possibility to reorganize and actually come out better than before as well, not just regain and restore status quo like it was before the crisis or before the whatever disturbance.
Thank you, Inger. I would actually like to pick up on that point that you mentioned, this disturbance, which is COVID-19. And I was going to ask Helena if she could comment on this. So we're in the middle of several crises, right? We have a biodiversity crisis, we have a climate crisis, and then we had this pandemic happening worldwide. And people's perception probably is very different from what is the biodiversity crisis and what is the common knowledge about that. What has happened with climate change, where now there's a much more awareness in the global society and public about it, but that was not always the case. And there comes this pandemic, and this is impossible to ignore. But how would you like to comment on these three aspects, how they interlink, and exactly on this opportunity to what, as the COVID-19 pandemic made us reflect on, and how can we use this opportunity for something positive out of it?
When regarding humans, we never know, you know, it's always a challenge, but I think that is one of the aspects that clearly change it somehow. I don't know for how long, but as Inger was saying, we've noticed that we are humans, we are biological beings, and this vulnerability, at least, is become part of our perception of the world, of the planet, and we understand, at least for a while, that we are part of a system that has risks and that we have to face them, we have to prevent them, and we have, well, at least to solve those situations that pose risks for our daily lives. So in that sense, we had at least we were shaped, and we can say that the understanding of our vulnerability is changed, and one of the effects of this perception, it is going to be, in my opinion, the change of the World Health System. This is going to be the first change, I think, immediately after the pandemics. We have to organize the health system much more in the direction of nature. That means one planet, one health. It's more and more the narrative of having a more healthy life depends on a healthier planet. And so we have to care for biodiversity, we have to control pollution, we have to control climate change, because those are threats to our life and at least the life supporting systems. So in that sense, we have an impact. Another combination, but I had a slide to show you on the impact in terms of change in CO2 emissions over the crises, and I can show you very briefly. It is in my, it was, where is it? I lost it now. Because it was the last, you probably know it, all of you, but it's very interesting because it gives us a picture of the CO2 emissions over the century, and we did have a decline of the emissions, depression in different times of the century, of the 20th century. After several crises, it was common to see a decrease of CO2 emissions, and over the pandemic, so in 2020, we had about 7% of decrease in CO2 emissions of the pandemic, but we need 50% in 10 years. So we now have 9 years left. You can imagine the pressure to have this kind of change in 9 years. How can we achieve this target of 50% of change of the CO2 emissions? And it's also worth to point out that meanwhile, we have already increased the global temperature by 1.1 degrees Celsius. And our target is a maximum of 1.5 in the best scenario. So we are already very close to the 1.5 degrees of change that we want to achieve in order to avoid the worst scenario, or the first scenario of global warming. So this is a huge challenge, as you can imagine. I'm somehow confident that we will work for it. I'm not sure if we'll achieve it, but I know, we all know that it's essential to achieve it. So this is a very big and complex process. Of course, we are working for that, and I hope we'll manage, but it's a big challenge anyway. So this is one of the issues that is going to change, and we are all fully committed to this scenario of change for 2030. The climate change compromise is probably the strongest, and the perception of the citizens now. So the climate policy is already inside the perception of the communities in general, of the policymakers. Everybody now understands what is happening with climate change. It took like 3-4 decades, but now we can say, okay, the climate change, climate policy is already part of the perception of the world citizens and different players, the banking system, companies. We have a lot of strong agreements that really committed to achieve this goal. We don't have the same for biodiversity, unfortunately. We don't have any kind of compromise as strong as this one for biodiversity, to preserve nature, to protect nature, and really to restore nature, even when, because for the ecological community, for ecologists as we are, for the scientific community of ecology, we realize that is not anymore enough to achieve sustainability. We need to start regenerating the systems, because we lost a lot of the functioning of the systems. But this is another narrative, probably another talk that we may have one day. Just responding to your questions, I think that we have for the climate agenda. I think that we are shaping the framework, and we are very much committed. But in terms of of biodiversity, we are far away from it. So the change after the pandemic is essentially in terms of our dependence on nature. And I don't know how long it will remain in our minds and brains, because as long as we get all vaccinated and you know, and we can consume, I'm not sure if we will really proceed in the best path. I hope so, but not clear to me. In any way, we have time to discuss probably the Green Deal agenda, and because this is a very nice political framework, and it will help certainly, but I'm not sure how much we can do with it. But I mean, I have time to discuss it now. I think I've talked too much, and I'm not sure if I replied to your question. I hope so.
You did, thank you. And I still had a question for Inger on this, how the past shaped the present, but I think you made this very nice transition to the part of the solutions and the future. So maybe I'll let Inger, I will ask you about inequalities a little bit in the framework of solutions. I would like to make just a short pause to ask the students or any of the viewers that are here on Zoom or on YouTube by chat if they would like to ask anything about this part of the conversation or make any comment before we move on. Everyone is paying a lot of attention. Okay, we can, I don't see any hands raised, so I will move on. Helena was mentioning already part of what I had here is how to better shape our future. Both Inger and Helena spoke about how we have to think about being part of nature and not this antagonism or one versus the other. And so I would like you both to comment on what are the contributions of science, of society, of governance, and what are some of the tools already at hand. And yes, I did ask Helena if she could please prepare a little bit information about the European Green Deal, because we are in Europe and Portugal is now in the presidency of the European Union this 6 months and almost over. And also because Helena is part of the mission for the climate change action that has been involved in discussion of several of these documents. So Inger, would you like to start a little bit so we alternate and then Helena could speak a little bit of the European Green Deal? And Inger, I'm sure not only how we shape the present from the past and the current crisis, but also how we resolve or we try to improve our planet, those both have to take into account inequalities, right? So I don't know if you would like to talk a little bit about this, geographical inequalities, north versus global north, global south, and cultural, ethnical, age-related inequalities, gender.
There's a lot of
many
things. We can go on and on.
Exactly, we cannot go on and on, but if you would like to touch one of these subjects as part of also the solution, one of the problems, but also part of the solution of not leaving anyone behind.
Yes, it's incredibly important to get more focused on solutions than on problems, I think, on the road ahead. And that's one of the feedbacks we get from the students, that we, of course, as scientists, we go out and observe, right? And we observe things that are not completely well with our ecosystems as ecologists. So that's kind of part of our job, right? But at the same time, we need to be better at proposing solutions. And in order to do that, we need to be able to talk to people from other disciplines first and foremost, but we also need to be able to talk to the common man in the street, or to politicians, or to land managers, or farmers, or whoever is having an impact on a geographical area, right? So I think it's very good that we see the development in universities, even though universities are very, very kind of, conservative structures. and power structures as well. We see this move out of the siloed disciplines and more into seeing a problem as a whole, and then you bring in the different disciplines that you need to solve that particular problem. And that's much more real world focused than what we have been used to working like in many universities around the globe for decades and decades. So that's one thing, that the educational system is changing and is more coherent or more in line with the needs of the future. And that's a good thing. And then, of course, we have this, with the Anthropocene, we have this kind of conundrum. We have this big planet. Planet Earth has the same diameter as ever, you know, and we are pretty much the same size as human beings. We're maybe a little taller and a little broader than our predecessors, but we're pretty much the same size as well. So if you start walking around, then you realize that the planet is a pretty big place. But we're a lot more people, of course, nowadays than ever before, even in recent history. And then also we're hyper-connected. We're hyper-connected with trade. We exchange food commodities. Of course, the food system is super important when it comes to how we are going to fare through this period, the Anthropocene. And we're hyper-connected when it comes to communication. And we also saw that on the onset of COVID-19, how incredibly fast that spread to every part of the globe when it first started spreading, right? So everything is hyper-connected. So it's very difficult to kind of isolate things. And that's we have this big planet, small world kind of issue. So we can see at the planet, we now see that the planet is our home, and that's the only planet we have. So it's easier in that perspective to get more notion of global solutions instead of just local solutions. So people realize that we have to negotiate deals on an international level instead of just on national levels. Everything has been very national up till quite recently. And now we understand that we need to really have these international deals. So I think that's a little bit of the backdrop. And then, of course, sustainability for who is a very pertinent question, right? Because, of course, we have the choice of many things. I can choose if I want to eat meat or a plant-based diet, and I can get enough nutrition through a plant-based diet. Most of the people on the planet don't have that choice, right? So we also have to understand that there is a big difference between priorities and the need for development in the global north versus the global south. And 60% of all people in 2030 will live 25 degrees north or south of the equator. That's a pretty narrow band, the tropics around the planet. And that's where 60% of all people will live. That's also where we have our rainforests that we really want to conserve. So you see, there's these conflicts that are far away from the global north. So I think a lot of the issues also when it comes to intergenerational equity, when it comes to sustainable development, is why should I refrain from some development that needs resources for some unborn generations in the future? It's very hard to kind of elicit emotion for generations far into the future. None of the previous generations have been thinking of future generations as much as we are asked to do it today. And we have so many issues here and now too that need solving right away. It's difficult to understand how you should plan for for future issues that needs to be solved for future generations. So that intergenerational equity balance is kind of hard for most people to get their head around. But of course, it is how we manage the planet now, so future generations can live here. That's the definition of sustainable development. So that's something we need to take into consideration, but it's very hard to start these mind experiments, and we do that in some of the courses. We have these mind experiments about the future and how you would choose, and it seems like the students find it also quite hard to try to envision how to manage also for future generations. Yeah, I think that's that was a little bit all over the place, but I would really like to hear about the Green Deal and the European situation.
I think we can ask Helena to give us some feedback, and then I will let one of the students ask this question after that, because she raised her hand just as I was saying there was no one. And I will just read a comment that Alicia Baraclow left here. That she says, I agree, equity, power, and political processes are super important for understanding environmental change and our pursuit for sustainability. And she recommends some reading that the students can see. And I must say that that's one of the strongest factors also that keeps bugging me, is this question of equity and equality, and how can we promote the best choices when a huge portion of the planet doesn't afford to have a choice. So this is a very complicated, difficult topic. But let's move on then to some of the solutions that are on the table.
No, Catarina, maybe you can first respond to the student that raised their hand.
Okay, then it's fine. It's Lucia Grunman. Can you unmute yourself and ask the question you would like to ask? And I apologize, didn't see your hand on time.
No problem. Right now there's an ambulance passing. I will wait a second. So it's to Professor Freitas and Måren. From the first and the second talk, so it kind of fitted to wait a little bit with the question. So my question was, to which extent would organic vegan diet influence the food system? And then combined with, usually in those places where people have the chance of deciding actively whether they want to eat meat or milk products or not, they have this intensive, how do you say this in English, way of keeping animals. So in places or countries where people really depend on meat, usually they don't have those big farms with many cows in a small place. So yeah.
No, please go ahead, Inger. I mean,
yes, it is of course a big, very big topic. But yes, I just was part of a debate after seeing Sea Piracy, the movie, and if we stop eating seafood, would land-based foods be sufficient? And it's kind of the same kind of argumentation. And of course, yes, industrial meat production has enormous environmental costs, and also ethical. It's lots of ethical dilemmas around it. But I'm not an expert on diets, but again, it's this: who has the choice to choose their diets, really? Because when it comes to sustainability, it's what can be scaled that's going to be important, not what the 2% wealthiest or 2% smartest or most intellectual people on the planet can do, but it's what can be scaled for millions and millions or billions of people. That's what is going to kind of set us on the right track. So scalability is extremely important And when it comes to diet, of course, if people reduce, if the meat consumers of the planet, which is mostly the global north, if we reduce our meat consumption by 50, 60, 70%, it would make a big contribution. While if just getting 3% of the population to become vegan probably wouldn't make such a big contribution. But I'm not certain if that's what you're after in your question, because it was quite a big question. But yeah. So I think we need a little bit of everything. But I think we certainly, because the thing is that we eat more and more meat. That trend is just going very much upwards, and it hasn't stopped for a long time. So asking people to completely abandon meat is maybe not very realistic, but we need to somehow bend that curve, because that cannot continue, because otherwise we will just have livestock on this planet and we will eat everything around us. So and have huge environmental, even bigger environmental consequences of livestock keeping. So I think, how can we bend that curve? How can we, without telling people that you can't eat meat? Because I think very few governments are ready to implement that type of regiment.
Yeah, no, but anyway, Lucia, your question is very relevant, because it's a fact that we are not going to solve the biodiversity or climate crisis without addressing renovating the food system. We cannot go on with the same kind of food system for many reasons, and one of them is inequity, as you were discussing before. We cannot keep producing for the North Hemisphere and destroying and with such there are a number of figures. I'm not prepared for that. It's one of the topics I really care most, and the food system, I think it's essential. The consumer perception of the food system is essential to achieve the transition. So the transition of the food system is essential to achieve the ecological world that we need. What would you? Just a couple of examples. I don't think we are changing. The agroecology is becoming more and more a strong narrative in between, the agroecological systems, because we understand that we have to include more ecological principles in all farming systems. So agriculture has to include more and more the knowledge that we have already in terms of agroecology. But this is going to be more and more relevant in all the conventional farming systems, as well as the small farming systems, and all kinds of agroforestry systems. So we have more and more a mix of solutions, but all of them will become more and more grounded on ecological principles. That is the most important thing, is having farming systems grounded in ecological principles, all of them, having consumers ready and more responsible in terms of what they consume, and more and more having a proximity in terms of production and consumption. So we will tend to have to avoid, importing. This is the crazy things like importing apples from Bolivia cheaper than the apples that I'm growing in my garden. This is one of the absurds of the food system that we built. So we have to change this. Of course, this is not possible anymore. But at the same time, we have an agenda, just I go to the Green Deal, we have an agenda at the European level. The farm to fork is one of the axes of the Green Deal, as you probably know. It's a very important agenda for not only for Europe but for the world. And the farm to fork is based exactly in the number of principles that I hope we'll follow. And I can just enumerate a number of them, not all of them, but one of the part of the goals of the farm to fork agenda is, for example, to avoid, we waste like 30 to 40% of the food in Europe. This is not possible anymore. So we have to avoid waste. We want to have 50% less of pesticides by 2030. Why we cannot go on using the same this huge amount of pesticides and chemical inputs in our farming system. So the target is to eliminate 50%. And another target is to have 25% more organic farming systems in the mix of farming that we have in Europe. This is another target of the Green Deal Farm to Fork. There are a number of other targets that, of course, this is a political agenda. You can say, well, we are not going to get there. This is just a political, goal. But it's important to have this kind of frameworks, because 50% of the European budget is for the agriculture policy. Half of the budget is for the agriculture policy. So what we have to force our political system is to put that huge amount of money in the best options in order really to change it, because we can produce without, we have knowledge, and that's where science comes. We have knowledge, we have science to do it better, avoiding all this kind of pesticides, fertilizers, chemicals that we really have, and it's crazy. But at the same time, this is not yet part of the Green Deal, but we have to impose it. The agenda Farm to Fork is very nice for Europe, but it has to represent a change for the world, not only for Europe. It's nice to have a very nice ecological agenda for us. But what, as Inger was saying, and what about the rest of the world, Meanwhile, we consume 2/3 of our meat in Europe. We import from South America. 2/3 we import from South America without any rules. So you don't know who is producing, how are they paid, what is the change of land that you have to permit in order to have this production of meat in South America. So most of it is coming from the change of land that used to be tropical forest, and we want to prevent the loss of biodiversity, but at the same time we consume that meat that is going to be imported from South America, because in Europe we don't have more land to put in agro, you call it for husbandry, for animals. We cannot change more land for that. It's too much. We already have 70%. It's already too much. We cannot just put more into the basket. So this means that the pressure, and of course the pressure of people and communities all around the world, our food system is not fair. It's destroying nature, is destroying our health. So we have to change the food system. And of course, part of it is responsibility of the consumer. But the consumer has no literacy in many cases. You don't know why are you eating, what are you eating. So the science has to help on that. But this is a big. I don't think I could go that way. But it's just to just to a very short introduction to the field. I really think that the food system is critical to address the biodiversity and climate crisis. And so you are right, Lucia. We have to see what we are going to eat, and if we can keep on eating meat the same rate as we've been using and eating it, probably we cannot do it. But as Inger was saying, at the same time, the world is not all the same. So you have different situations. So in my opinion, what the most important thing is to have ecological principles more and more in all the systems and the activities that are dealing with nature and with land. At the same time, having more literacy and bringing more literacy to the consumer, so that the choice can be, better informed on one hand, but we have to care for the others. We live in Europe, but the world is much bigger than that.
Thank you, Helena. That's a really important slogan, because a lot of the local, regional, or continental measures are not enough, right? If we don't think about the impacts, is with the food system, is with the carbon emissions, everything. We cannot claim that we're great and very ecological friendly and not think about the impacts we're having on our behavior is having somewhere else in the world. This has been a super interesting conversation, and I had more questions. I think I'll jump a few because probably some people have then other things. And I don't know if you wanted to add something else about the European Green Deal. But
just one thing, because Marta is asking me something. This is another topic, so we can go for it. But just to show, because Marta was asking, should we go for degrowth?
That's an important issue.
She's asking, should we, instead of, because as you know, the Green Deal, this is the Green Deal, the European Green Deal. You can see the European Green Deal is you have all the major topics. So the farm to fork, as I said, the idea is to bring a friendly food system, and this is the Green Deal, and it's a very nice framework, political framework, with a lot of problems, of course. And you can say, well, this is greenwashing, okay, but this, when you get older, you just learn how to deal with what you have, and of course claiming for more, but let's try to do the best I can with what I have. And this is a nice agenda, even though I agree probably we'll have, this farming system, the change of the farming systems is huge, and I'm pretty much aware that I will have a lot of, those big lobbies, big farmers, big companies. They will probably win in the end, but maybe not as much as before, But let's fight. But I will show you because Marta was asking, and these are the three policy packages: the ecological models, or ecological macroeconomic models that we can, and the green growth is very much what Marta was saying. It's in the end, it's increasing consumption, which should be avoidable in a way, or high labor productivity, which is again not exactly what we need. And then the other side is what we call, this is a very generical, of course, but the degrowth, which it means decreasing exports, decreasing consumption, having taxes for the wealthiest, and part of these claims are very important. But to get there, you have to realize that you'll have a lot of people jobless. You are going, the change of the economies can be so drastic that the impact in terms of the social impact can be very high, and you cannot guarantee, the change without a very strong social impact. And what we call the balance in between is what we call, and we managed to agree on the so-called Green Deal, which is a kind of of course, this balance is always difficult because you tend to go in favor of the greenwashing. And the Green Deal is a compromise where you come up with carbon taxes. That is our plan, to go into these carbon taxes and more to, well, Norway is doing a great job in that sense, at least compared to other countries in Europe, or high energy efficiency, renewable energy. These are the major actions that are informing the Green Deal. This is just a very figure to compare what is happening in the three main models. And the reason why we chose in Europe and also in the United States, we chose the so-called Green Deal, which is a kind of a balance, a compromise in between the two models. The degrowth model has a number of advantages, and we could discuss them. But in my opinion, the impact that we cannot prevent, at least I don't know at which extent we can prevent, is the social impact. And this can be well, we have seen part of it over the pandemic. What could happen? Let's suppose we'll have extension of the pandemic in our country, for example, in Portugal. The Portuguese government cannot keep for example, the activities or the shops, the restaurants. We cannot just keep supporting while people are not consuming anymore, for at least for a while. The impact of this can be very high, and the society, I don't know if the society can support it. I don't think so, because this balance, you can see what happened in France with the yellow, you call it, I don't remember anymore. So the yellow vests that they were fighting. So this is a big issue, and I just want to just as a final note, yes, we have the Green Deal with a lot of problems, and part of the problem is that we don't have in the Green Deal what is going to happen in the relationship with other continents, and how can we prevent or help other countries in our regions to deal with this change of trading. So, but these are but anyway, this our political framework, I think, is one of the best that we have achieved, and I hope that we will manage to keep it in the right path, and not really supporting the greenwasher systems that will remain, of course, in the system. That's clear, but it's well, that I think. Well, I've tried to respond to the. Okay, Catarina, this is a big topic.
Yes,
it's a big topic.
I think we could do several webinars on these different topics. I think we will have to make a choice of what we keep speaking. And so I think before we finish, so you talked about political measures, which are fundamental to this. And now I would like to bring it to more personal to both of you, and how academics, scientists can also contribute. And then in particular, how UNESCO chairholders, like both yourself, that are related with sustainable development, the theme of your UNESCO chairs, how do you see your contribution to this, to shaping the future? Maybe Inger, you can start, and Helena complement.
Yeah, sure. I think it's important, as I said previously, to see the whole picture, and of course you specialize in a field, but of course you can also read up and understand and speak to people in different fields. And this is something that we should promote. And this chair network is quite big. It's over 800 chairs, many different subjects. So it's a global network. And I work with biosphere reserves, UNESCO biosphere reserves specifically. And I think that's a great way of both doing outreach and also research that deals with real world problems. So I think it's a good opportunity to promote. Of course, UNESCO is a sister organization under the UN, so it's very linked up to the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. So I think in that regard, I think it's a good link that we can use to work specifically towards sustainability issues.
Could you briefly tell our students about that, about what the Agenda 2030, they've heard about it this morning, but maybe just also so the general public can hear very briefly, I'll ask you.
Yeah, the Agenda 2030 was launched in 2015, and it comprises 17 sustainable development goals and 169 targets under these goals. And it was through a lengthy process of citizen involvement. I think it was over 2 million people that contributed to shaping this agenda. And it, of course, it comes out from the 8 Millennium Development Goals that we had previous to this agenda. But this is more focused on sustainable development everywhere. So all countries are developing countries in this agenda. There's not a single developed country when it comes to this agenda. So even Norway, with all our oil wealth, is a developing country in this regard, and we have a lot of work to do, especially when it comes to our relationship with nature.
Thank you, Inger. I would ask just Helena then to complement a little bit of this, of what our role and in particular academic partnerships. And I know you have a special topic project where both Inger and you and I are somehow connected. So maybe you can speak a little bit with that example and talking about how these partnerships, right? Our partnership is one of the Sustainable Development Goal. So the last one, 17. So I think it's a good topic to try to wrap up this discussion.
Thank you. Well, I believe in partnerships, that's one of the nice parts of science. I think I really like it. And this one is precious with Inger and her UNESCO chair, with her biosphere reserve. And we are indeed involved in a common, well, actually in common projects, not anymore a single one. We are involved in plural. And I hope this is just the beginning of a very strong collaboration. And so we have this project on the biosphere reserves, and we are starting the field work, as you Catarina know, and Inger, she's now invited to join us one of these days, because we are now just ending, I hope, the pandemic situation. It's a very nice project where we work. In Portugal, we have 12 biosphere reserves. And in Norway, Inga is collaborating in one biosphere reserve that is also involved in the project. And it's a very nice project. We don't have time to show you. I had a slide that we just present recently, but I don't think it's worth to bring it today. But the whole idea is to study together the model of functioning of these biosphere reserves, and to have because we both believe that these biosphere reserves are very nice models, socio-ecological models of living and in harmony, nature and human communities. And so we are learning from the development of these reserves, and we also, I think that we have a strong commitment with UNESCO and with the UNESCO values of education, science, and cultural, and development based on this relationship between nature, and this harmony between nature and the human development. So this is a challenge at the scientific level. We are in our team. We are studying the ecosystem services And but we also have an socio-ecological methodology in order to assess the role of communities and cultural in the development of these special, fantastic spots of biodiversity. But anyway, yeah, I don't know if Inger wants to add something, but it's we are just starting the project. We'll have very soon a site where you can see more of what's going on in the biosphere reserves. We had last week entire week in the field of Castro Verde in the south of Portugal. It was amazing. And so the project is just jumping into the field finally. And that's so we will have news about it very soon. We have a meeting in June, a conference which is open in the 28th of June. We'll have a conference on the Portuguese-speaking countries' biosphere reserves involving African reserves and Brazil. So if you want to attend, it's the 28th of June, and I can share with you the program. It is going to be to take place in Serralves, but it's open and you can follow it virtually. So it's another chance to know what's going on with this project. Thank you, Catarina, again. And thank you, Inger, for joining us again today. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Helena. I know Helena has a commitment now, so we will probably wrap up, but I still had a short question that I will jump others that since you're both women and accomplished scientists, I would like just a very brief note on how can you promote gender equality, both in your current locations, but also worldwide. I know we're still privileged in terms of that. It's not the worst place to be, Portugal or Norway, for gender inequality, but I would like you just to make a comment on that, because even if we were privileged, there's still many difficulties which cannot compare to other parts, but it's still a challenge, I believe.
Yes, what should I say to that? I think it's very good to have women in academia and women as mentors and supervisors, of course, because it's very important if we want to see more women in the future in science. Then we have to have good role models, of course. So I think that's one thing that we need to keep up and do a good job when we are in that position, of course. And then I think, like with the food system, we have to fight every single day for things that are not equal between genders, right? Even in Norway, which is a pretty, on a global scale, a pretty gender equal society, we have lots of issues with gender imbalances. So it's not all good here either. So we have to really stand firm and take those discussions and arguments when they arise again and again and again. Otherwise we backtrack, and we see that as soon as you relax, then sometimes actually we de-evolve. we go back to worse states.
Yeah. Fully agree.
Helena?
No, I fully agree. I agree with Inger. I feel the same way. Likewise.
Okay, so for those that would like to keep on within the class, and Inger, if you would like to still talk a little bit about youth engagement and analysis, we're welcome to stay. But for the official part of this webinar, we have to, unfortunately, finish here. We've been for an hour and a half, a very interesting and discussion. I thank you both very much, Inger and Helena. It was a pleasure to have you and to discuss these topics with you. So Helena, I know you have to go. Anyone else? You can stay on.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Helena.
Thank you. Thank you to you. Bye-bye.